thank you, Mr. Bridges, for just being here with us and allowing us to honor you in this way. Thank you.
It is my
Thank you
pleasure,
so
Ms.
much.
Topaz.
So my first thing that I want to know is what motivated you to focus your career as a public servant? And this is a two-part question. And then after that, now as a board member. So what motivated you to do that?
Oh, I think the first thing that kind of geared me up a little bit. I live in historic South Side, and I was so frustrated with a lot of the young people, kids in the neighborhood, who attended the schools, that for whatever reason we were not as successful at getting them to access what they need. I would see kids, particularly. I always tell the story that I would watch kids that from going in and out of schools,
Right.
elementary. They would be so excited and
Yeah.
hey, Mr. Wallace, look what I'm reading. Let me tell you, I might show you my report cards or whatever,
Yeah.
and they were excited.
Yeah.
But I would watch them as they moved into the middle school. You could see that excitement tend to dwindle down, was not quite there as much. And in some cases, that by the time many of them were in high school, they had pretty much checked out.
Yeah.
And that concerned me from living in the neighborhood for the last 25 years, that many of those who checked out, some of them, because my kids who were older hung out with all these kids. My house was the house where everybody kind of came
Wow.
and hung out and stuff. And I said, well, what happened to so-and-so? Oh, he got incarcerated, he got locked up. But I could almost start counting down those kids, especially the boys who were friends of my son such a time.
Yeah.
And that began to bother me. I knew something was wrong, that if I could sit here and see that. So
Right.
I just wasn't hearing much of the conversation around that singled in, particularly among African American boys, and what was happening. So that kind of shifted me in that direction to kind of
Wow.
to amplify the voices of what's happening and listen and hear what some of the concerns were.
Absolutely. And I'm a former educator, so you're speaking my language
Yes,
already.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Awesome.
Now my next question is, can you tell me about a specific program that you have been especially proud of leading since you've been here in Fort Worth?
Oh wow. Okay, I gotta sing.
And I know it's a lot of them, but just a few that you've been really proud
I'm gonna
of.
single out one in particular. Some years ago, when I was promoted as the center director for the Bethlehem Community Center, at that time, community centers were just pretty much designed a place where kids come in and play, and
Right.
run around, play basketball, this, that,
Right.
and the other. And I kind of had a crazy idea. I said, what if we could do something, get kids really excited about reading or something like that? And man, just imagine what that would be like. And everybody's like, oh, kids don't want to come to a community center to read. They go to school to read.
Right.
But one thing I knew about our kids are competitive. Our kids, they like a little bit of a challenge and stuff like that. So I never forget, I gathered all the kids around. And I said, guys, we're going to start this reading program. And look, reading program, And I never forget, one of the little girls said this, and she said, so what are we going to start acting white? I said, baby, no, reading's for everybody, So in doing that, they let me know that my work was cut out. I created this little competitive piece to where we said that we set a goal that we were going to do so much reading. I think we had 100-some kids at the center, and we were calculating the amount of time they were reading. And every Friday, we would have this pep rally, and we would call out the names of kids who did so much reading. And they just got, I started seeing they were fighting a little bit harder to make sure that their name got called up. And one kid would come up to me and say, hey, Mr. Wallace, you didn't call my name. I said, well, you ain't doing no reading.
Right?
So it just created this competitive piece among them. And we knew we were on to something. I'll tell a very quick story. I'll never forget, one weekend, I said to the kids, I said, guys, we're going to turn the TV off this weekend. Nobody's watching TV and stuff like that. And we're going to read. And I said, yeah! They all like pumped up and everything.
Right.
So this mother calls me up and she says, Mr. Wallace? And I'm like, oh my God. Did you tell the kids they couldn't watch TV that weekend or something?
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my God. I'm upset. I thought she was like upset. And I said, yeah? And she said, well, thank you. My little 14-year-old, 15-year-old was at the kitchen table reading.
Wow.
And I knew
That's a blessing.
we had tapped into something. And
Yeah.
it was just competitiveness and the excitement that was built kind of around that. So,
Wow. So here comes the sprinkle, right? Here
okay.
comes the sprinkle.
Okay.
So
Yes, man.
now, why do you believe that there has been like a loss of that passion for reading in this community with this generation? Why do you believe that?
Unfortunately, our kids learn from model. We don't see enough modeling of that. We are caught up by the little gadgetries in our hand and
Right.
stuff like that, and the computers and laptops and all that stuff. So there's not enough emphasis. We've not made it fun. And I think the basic just competitiveness. That's to me, if I could say the secret sauce that I kind of learned through the years is make it competitive. And I don't care if you tell these kids that, well, you know what, if you do more reading than this one, not only are we going to call your name out, but we had some little incentives. We get money from other folks to kind of get them more into it. But what we found out when we did this same piece of it just more recently, that the first was the high achievers that started doing the reading.
Right.
Because they're gonna do it.
They're
That's
gonna
what
do it
they
anyway.
do.
That's what they do. That's
know.
what they do.
But
That's so
when they,
true.
we would every 6 weeks, I'd go up to the school and call out the names, and I would literally want them, the other kids, to see me giving them the cash, and it was like $20 or something like that, and they would be watching. I'm like, oh, okay, I see how this works. Well, it went from being just the high achievers to the kids who were more behaviorally challenged.
Right, of course. Listen, like you said, you're speaking my language already. Yes.
That kind of got them more
Yeah.
engaged into it, and we knew that once again, that began to open it up to a lot of other folks, and I think we got them excited about reading.
Yeah, and I have more to say about that, but I'm gonna move on
Yes,
because
ma'am.
we'll be here all day.
Yes, ma'am. That's all right.
But in what ways have your outreach, your crisis intervention, mentoring, and your diversity programs have made a difference in the lives of young people in Fort Worth? You've already really kind of alluded to that, but in what other ways?
Wow, it made a difference. I think when this was interesting because I live in the neighborhood where most of the kids go to school, and we have been pumping up the reading with the kids. And one day I was at the barber shop, and the kid, not my hair, but my beard. But anyway, that's a whole nother story.
That's a whole other story.
And I'm sitting there, the guy's like shaving my beard, and I see this little kid like staring over me, and I'm like, looking at it.
Wow.
Who is this kid?
Oh, yeah.
And he said, hey, Mr. Wallace. I'm like, oh, okay. He said, I just want you to know I'm doing my reading and stuff. So it became this energy began to sprout, and it's like came by, they'd tell me what they're reading.
Wow.
The kids who live behind me have a trampoline. And I got a 6-foot fence, but on the trampoline, they're jumping up. So the kids jumping up on the trampoline. I'm doing my reading. So it said to me, it created this excitement. So I felt like we created a little bit of excitement around reading, and I thought that was pretty exciting.
I just think that is so interesting because, in the generation where I grew up, you read because that's what you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
We didn't get any incentives, you didn't get any extra money, nothing like anything like that. But what I've noticed about being in the schools, the kids love when you, like you said, call their name or motivate them, incentives, just highlight even,
Yes.
2 points of growth or just anything.
Yes.
They love that. And so
Yes.
I love that you are implementing that in the schools because it's needed.
Yes, ma'am.
It's
Yes,
needed. It's so needed.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of that. One of our schools was finished up there with a campus, and I said, we need to have a big celebration. We need to have the band. We brought the high school band out,
Absolutely.
all the parents out, because we wanted to celebrate. Because I wanted to let them know, when you do the right thing, that's what we celebrate.
Right.
And again, we build in things as they're younger, to as they get older, they continue to move in that same fashion.
Right, and they'll never forget that. It's
Yes, ma'am.
so,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
impactful. And so, next question. So, can you share an example of how your work has made a positive impact? Now, I know you've already talked about the reading programs. Anything else that you can think of that has impacted the parents or just the community, or those who are connected to the kids?
Right. I did what they call a diversion program some years ago, and all that meant in a fancy way that, say, for instance, a kid had committed an offense for the first time, rather than have him go on his record and all that good stuff, we created this where the parent and the kid had to come with us for, it was like, I think they did 2 evenings a week for, I think it was maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. And every day, twice a week, they would come there. But we created activities that actually would get them to kind of sit down with each other, tell their stories, because some of the activities was based upon telling some of their family history. Some of the activities was really teaching the parent how to listen to them, and I never forget that the one kid, his mother had a little bit of a challenging lifestyle. Let's just put it that way, and sometimes we parent from the best space that we know how.
Right.
And I'm not being critical.
We can't go beyond our capacity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I always say that even a crackhead, believe it or not, she wants something better for her kids. She may not know how to get to that piece, but she wants a better life for them and stuff. And in that, there were some activities that we were doing where she was telling some of her personal stories from her parent and stuff. And this kid had never heard anything like that before.
Wow.
And how I done that, I'm often talking about my experience with my mom and my grandmother, how that impacted my life, and how it's important that with this generation that we pass on those stories and let them know, because many of the kids have no clue as to what our experiences was, that as we were coming up, too often what's happening, everybody wants to hide it. Well, wait a minute, let them know that this didn't just come to us, but somebody had to make some sacrifices, and this was what our childhood experience was like, and to see that, and that mother and kid kind of interacted. It was obvious they had never interacted on that level before, and it was a piece that she said, "I just want you to know, I love you." Now this little kid, maybe 13 years old, you could tell he kind of hardcore, hard shell.
Wow.
But just to watch that little tear just slowly drip down his eyes and stuff, because she never told him that before. He had never heard that before.
Wow.
But it just turned, I could see the turning of the relationship, because he saw his mother in a different light. That you can't put a dollar value on
you can't.
on being able to affect a family the way that we were able to do.
That's such a blessing. Now, my children are adults too, and so I had a recent conversation with my daughter about the same thing. I was trying to shield her. Right? Trying to shield her, trying to protect her.
Wow.
Didn't want her to really know the struggles, But, as we came to a different point in our relationship, she said, I want to know.
Right.
Yeah, I want to know these struggles. I want to know what you went through. I want to know,
Yes.
the generational curses,
Yes.
The things that we can transform, the generational blessings, just all of that. So I can value that, and I can honor that so much because I went through it myself. So
Awesome.
absolutely.
Awesome.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely amazing.
Well, thank you very, very much.
So I was listening, of course.
Yes, ma'am.
And you were talking, you got a little bit about just the history of the school systems, of course. And we talked a little bit before this just about the history of Fort Worth and where you're from. And you can even share some New Orleans history if you want to. But how do you think the most important thing, or what's the most important thing that we should learn as a people about Black history? I know they say, just as far as you don't know where you're going, if you don't know where you come from. And so, like, in what ways, or what do you think is most important we could take?
And we kind of talked a little bit about it, that in the other section, but I can pop back into it and kind of elaborate a little bit more. I think it's one of the most important things that we can do is tell our story and pass those stories on, because so often I'm fortunate because I have one of my youngest kids is 17. So I've had another child at older age, and my mother had me at a very much late age in life, and her mother had her. And bear with me for a second. At a late age in life. So technically, I'm 3 generations away from slavery, based upon the ages of my parents. And I know I'm older. My grandmother, when I was probably about 10, was about almost 90 years old. And her grandmother, she knew in terms about things that they experienced. And I tell my kids that story. And from my father grew up in a very small town in Tylertown, Mississippi. And he had to literally hold his head down if he walked down the street. You could not. Because being a white man, if he looked eye to eye with a white man, that would consider to being uppity and literally could cause a lot of conflict. I tell my kids those stories. I want them to know that. And one of the experiences my father had gotten into a fight with a white man, and which was, again, this was in 1940 something. It was a given. He had to pack up and leave town. Again, I tell my children those stories. I tell my children the stories of some challenges that we had. I didn't know we were poor, but it was tough.
Right.
Too often I talk to parents, they don't tell those kids their stories. And in sometimes, in not telling their story, that they reward them with what I call it stuff, without understanding the work that had to go into getting the stuff.
Yes.
And I never forget, I seen this kid one time. This boy, and this was some years back, probably had about $600-700 worth of clothes on his back. And it may have been more than that. He couldn't buy a D if you paid for it. And I said, Mama, why are you doing that? You reward them for paying. She said, well, I didn't have it when I was a child. And my point, it used to buy.
But you're right.
So what incentive are you giving him to go out and do the right thing, work harder in school and stuff like that, if you're going to just, reward him for bad behavior and stuff? So all that goes by saying that those stories that we heard from Big Mama and all of those stuff, pass on. I think that is so important. The power of the church, or what it was like coming up. That was all we had. We didn't have that. I remember as a young boy that going to a meeting and there was no place else for us to meet but the church. There was some kind of community event going on. And I was extremely, extremely young, but that was a meeting place. That's what, if there was an issue going on in the community, if the church was built in such a way that if you didn't have a job, you came to the church. Yeah. You couldn't go to the unemployment office. If you would happen to be a single parent, bring that boy over here. Come here, show him how to do this little carpentry stuff or whatever work. That was just
connections.
Yeah.
Now we say networking, but that's literally where it first.
Yes, ma'am. That was just a given as towards what we do, and I think we've lost that. There really was I don't want to. A village per se. That's where we went, and that's where those talents was passed on to whatever. If I had a little gift to do whatever, then I'd set the little man beside me or that young lady beside me, and they would model. And again, that goes back to what we talked about earlier. Is modeling certain things that if we want kids to do something, this generation, you can tell me all day long, which you know what I'm saying, what you want, but I'm gonna just do this. I'm gonna watch you to see what you're saying, if it's matching what you're saying, and when they see that those two match, then you got their attention, because they're seeing you're walking the walk. You're not just saying certain things, and I think that, to me, kind of going back to the original question, that is a missing piece that we have got to find a way to get back to.
Right, and I think you touched on. Just to add a little bit about getting their attention, because I am a millennial, so yes. But I did grow up with 3 great grandparents, which I know a lot
Wow.
of my counterparts, well, not counterparts, but a lot of my friends,
Right.
they weren't as fortunate. And so I didn't realize that until I got older. But it's, again, about as far as catching attention or wanting to learn more or willingness to learn more, you know, how, like, if you could give any piece of advice for a millennial just to say or to seek, if I didn't know how to have that conversation or if I didn't know how to approach it, like what could be something or how could I approach
Right. I think it starts
speaking to
off.
my
I always tell everybody that you don't start parenting when they're 17. It's that little time when they're 2 or 3, and guess what? It's like sitting down reading books. And to me, the most, my daughters and sons, I love my sons, but it's that relationship, my connection with my daughter. Sitting down reading a book with her and just having her connect right next to me as I'm reading the story and using all these different voices and stuff like that. That's the beginning of that connection. That's the beginning of building that relationship, because I say you want to invest in them at a younger age, because they're going to get older and they're going to come against some bumps and bruises. They're going to come against what their friends tell them that, oh, wait a minute, I didn't what my daddy said. That doesn't make sense, but it's that kind of building that relationship and being there for them and listening. And I always say one more thing, that it's easy to love me when I'm perfect. That's easy. When I'm doing the right thing. But can you love me when I make my basic mistake as a teenager or whatever? And sometimes we have to learn that, and forgive me when I say this, maybe the way Big Mama handles some things may not be the best way to handle it today. We've got to find what, because better ways of communicating with our kids. Because I'll be honest, there's some things I grew up. I was dyslexic, and a lot of struggles I had coming up, and some of the wording, how my grandmother, but she was operating as an older lady who came from a different time and place. That's still frozen in my memory as to when when I try to do something, some words that come back to me that's triggered. That what, God bless her, I don't think she meant it. I know she didn't mean it in a bad way, but I said it all to say that as a parent, be conscious of words that you say. Too often I see parents, I said when I was at the school, when a parent was bringing the kid into school, and this woman cussed this kid out upside down, maybe 5, 6 years old. And my wife was always getting on me about this. But I can't, And I said, baby, please, everything you're saying is just going into his psyche. You can't expect him to go in there and have a good day after you just pour this negative information
into him at the top of the morning.
At the top of the morning, But we've lost that, because here's a challenge that we're seeing, at least that I'm seeing. I call it the ABCs of parenting. There used to be a time not long ago, just the basic, which is the things that we're talking about, that people knew. That was just a given. I think what we're seeing now with so much younger parents and those who've not imparted in them those basics, that it's foreign to them. I mean, the basics, this boy sitting up to 2 o'clock in the morning playing video games. We know you need to go to bed, boy, so you can get up. You'd be surprised that's not a part of the ABCs of parenting. And we have to have some honest conversations with some of us and say, that's not the best for our kid. And maybe and I'm a firm believer, many parents who are operating in that thing is because they don't know. And they've not had anybody who built a relationship to really kind of guide them in the right direction.
Okay. Well, thank you for that answer. We might need you back for something else around our parents or parenting, and we'll get you back for something. But
yes, ma'am.
Just to shine a little history on Fort Worth, and specifically, of course, we are the Potter's House of Fort Worth. And so how or what role have you played in the historic neighborhoods of Fort Worth?
That's,
or
I'm a,
some preservation
yeah,
of some of our
yeah,
historic
yeah.
neighborhoods of Fort Worth?
I am from New Orleans, as you said, but I've lived here longer than I've lived anywhere in my entire life. For the last 30 years, I was very fortunate that as when I first moved here, I worked as a community organizer initially, and I fell in love with Southeast Fort Worth and just the history of the neighborhood, and some. I was fortunate to have some older people who just took a liking to me and just, as they say, set me at their feet and just imparted me with all this different knowledge on systems and how they work. And I was so amazed. These were black professionals, from engineers to educators to just different nurses. One was a dentist who could have moved out of historic Southside 10 times over, but they chose to really, because they knew what the neighborhood was like once upon a time, and they had this optimistic view that they could bring that neighborhood back, and that means that all of us kind of rolling up our sleeves. And this was during a time during the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, when some of our neighborhoods, we talk about some of the challenges we deal with now, but back then it was much, much more challenging, and I was just amazed that, again, they weren't there because they ran out of money and they couldn't afford to live. These people were comfortable and could have packed up and left, but they really believed in the stories they would tell me. Oh yeah, that's where the first black banker lived at, and he was literally a millionaire. I said, a millionaire? He was a millionaire in the 30s. That's like a billionaire today that lived on this thing. Oh yeah, that's where Dr. So-and-so lived. Oh, that's where so-and. But they amazed me because they wanted to continue to tell those stories and make sure that others, and I think I was sharing that if something happened 100 years from now through neighborhood changes, they wanted to be something there to kind of tell the story of who lived in that. So there's a part of that, it's called Evans Plaza, that there's a large group of us got together that actually put there's plaques and that tells a story of some of these people who lived right in that neighborhood that most people would never believe in 100 years, but they didn't want that to kind of die off and go away. So the way it was created, that it will be there. And even today, there's a lot of development that's coming along that way. They're building around that area. And some of those folks not some, but many of them who've gone on and gone to heaven, I'm humbled that the vision that they had is still moving on. And I feel in some ways that, in a very, very small way, that playing a part to having that vision continue on.
All right. Well, thank you. And I know you mentioned, can you tell us a little bit about Miss Hazel?
Oh, wow.
Hazel Harvey.
Yes.
As you mentioned, that group and the pioneer.
Yes. I got to say a couple of things. Hazel Harvey Peace, Frank Staten, Marvinette Gray. These were people that, and I'm not exaggerating, I say buildings are named after them, but they were just some of the most humble people that I've ever met. And the fact that, I wasn't from here, they would take the time to show into me. Miss Peace was just, when I met her, she was 100 years old, but she just had this presence about her. She was the dean of girls at IMTEL, and and I'll use Roy's name. Roy would come into a room, and if he started talking to something when he wasn't supposed to be, he's the county commissioner, She'd like tap her hand on the table.
Now Roy. No, I'm just kidding.
And Roy would and you could tell, you could almost, like he shift back to like a little kid. But that was the kind of, that's what she had. That's who she was. And this lady, I had never met anybody like her for her age, and as intelligent and had the sharpest memory. When I first started my reading program, I used to get her to come read to the kids at the community center. Yeah. And one day she was talking to the kids, and she was talking about me. She said, I want you to know that I was the person that interviewed your center director. Now, this was probably 6, 7 years ago, if not longer. And this lady started going through my resume. Why? what was on my resume, why I wanted to apply for this job. Some stuff I had forgotten about, but he just like was 100 years old.
Could spit it.
Could spit it like it was nothing and stuff, you know. But I believe I try so often in what I do is to pay homage to them because I can't think of anybody else that directly affected my life by what they had by giving to me as a person who wasn't from here, but they treated me like their own kid and stuff. And I hope, and I keep saying this in some small way, even as I serve on the board, that I try to continue to tell their stories as to not only how they impact my life and literally save the community. Yeah. That a lot of people would not have said, hey, I'm courageous enough to take a stand. I'm talking about when gangbangers were literally on every corner, but these folks really was committed to stay and really develop that community and get it back to. Now, it's not anywhere near where it needs to be, but compared to where some of the challenges that they were facing years ago. And I see some kids, they're adults now, and they'll tell me, I remember Miss Peace used to come and read to me and this, that, and the other. But that says a lot to me that her memory is still alive. And when now they've named the school after her, library after several other places. So that says a lot to me.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And since, you know, not your theme, but your mantra of building bridges or building possibilities, but how can we use these lessons from Black History Month, of course, and just Black history and just a historic of us as a people to help us bridge those possibilities of the future?
That's a great question. I think the strength that when we look back at our communities is that no matter how difficult things were and what we did or did not have at that time, we had each other. We had each other in the family unit in terms of what it was, and I think I shared this earlier. If you didn't have a dad, don't worry about that. I got you. You know, if you didn't have a skill don't worry about that. I got you. We've got to figure out some kind of way and how to continue on with that legacy. And I try as much as possible that I made a commitment that when I ran that I was going to always speak truth to people. And I mean that and sometimes I thank God that I was fortunate that I had some older people who were in my life who could pull me to the side and say, Wallace, boy, please, get your act together, this, that, the other. And I thank God for that. I've been married for 25 years. A good friend of mine who mentored me, he had been married like 45 years, you know, and I just admired that about him. But there were times when I was just being a buckethead, and he could just pass on that wisdom and that knowledge to me from his experience. There needs to be more of that. But in order to do that, we've got to build trust and relationship with people that when I'm talking to you, it's not to criticize you or cut you down, but it's to really empower you. And if we can, when we figure that out on how to communicate those kind of messages, because I think deep down inside there is a yearning to find out how did Big Mama and them get over, as they say, the old saying, you know, but not really understand those connections and things that we had back then and how important that was when even though we didn't have the gadgetries and didn't have all the other fancy stuff, but without
so
time,
much at our fingertips these days,
exactly.
Right?
But what we had each other, and how important that is, and to kind of reflect back what I said earlier about how important it is to tell those stories. That is beyond anything. The value of what we can do. I tell everybody this true story that when I first moved here, I had just gotten a job. My children's mother at that time was not working, so I didn't have a whole lot of money. It just happened to be right around Christmas time. And I'll never forget, man, oh God, this is like yesterday, that I had bought Christmas presents, but the Christmas presents was notebooks and pencils and underwear. Part of basic stuff, you know. Just wrapped it all up and we sit around there. And one year, we sit around with Christmas, this is fast forward, and one of my sons, he's gone on to do a lot of more Grammy Award winning, all kind of crazy stuff he's been in. And I was saying to them, I said, what about all the Christmas here? What Christmas was the best Christmas? And they said, you know that time when we wrapped up all little pencils and notebooks? That really stood out to me. And I went like, wow. I mean, and again, I've given them so much more stuff since then, and they've had their own personal experience so much then, but it was something about that. And we too often believe that we have to go broke. And don't get me wrong, not anything wrong with people wanting to buy and give things to their kids. But it's what they're going to remember that time that we spent with them. That to me, if we can, that's going to be the last memory. Or the fact my daughter still talks about when I read her at nighttime and stuff like that. You know, so that to me, if we can pass that on, that's invaluable.
Yes, it is. It is. Well, I think this kind of wraps us up. But let us know. First of all, thank you so much again for agreeing to do this for us. Just a gem. I can't even get the words out. Just about our history, Black history, your history, and the importance of connecting and sharing our stories and how we have to continue to do that. So thank you for that. And then how can we stay connected with you? So like on social media, how can we follow you? We want to make sure we let everybody know your website, but how's the best way to stay connected?
Wallace Bridges at Fort Worth ISSD, and we also have a Facebook page that's on there. And all that's linked to my website, all connected to that. Please, I'd love for you to connect with us and tell us. You know, I'm really big on if you're a parent or principal or teacher, something that's going on, tell your story. I would love posting the story of something positive that's going on. That too often we don't hear enough of some of the great things that's going on. So,
in your district
is District 4.
Okay.
Which encompass South Side all the way down to Forest Hill.
Okay. Just so we can let our parents
Sure.
know too. Yes, sir.
It's District 4. I hope I make sure I said that.
But thank you so much.
No, thank you. This was my pleasure.
Okay.